5.
Cool, cool. Welcome everyone to June's Unreal Meetup. It's great to see you all here. Tonight we're going to have our guest speaker Michael from Digital Lode taking us through his experiences developing for VR platforms and his game Espire 1. I'll get you to take it away, Michael. Sorry, just before you go, we do have a Q&A section as well. Please use that area if you have any questions for Michael, but we'll leave the questions to the end as well. All right, take it away.
Cool. Is the screen share coming through?
Yep.
Oh.
Yep.
All right, Ripper. Well, yeah. Huge thanks, Yasin, Chris, for the opportunity. We kind of have spent the last week or so thinking, what's all the stuff we wish we knew about VR before we started developing our VR title, and that's kind of hopefully what we've tried to put into this talk. And so, yeah. I'll kick it away. So we're Digital Lode, immersive media. We started up 2017 and before COVID, and still currently we're based in the Cotton Mills, but it's just our servers and the occasional staff member that visits. So if you're ever near the Cotton Mills, feel free to, and the stage 3 restrictions are over, hit us up and come say g'day. We're now a team of 9 full-time. And yeah, spread across programming, art, QA, and use dev. And this talks a lot about Espire 1 as well. So aside from the current team, there's also a few people that were key through the development of that game. And many more, including audio engineering and voice actors and dev support, everything really. So what is Espire? So effectively, it's a game where you're working for the intelligence force of Australia, and a black site, an IFA black site in the Northern Territory, is under siege by OFIS, who are a band of 6 mercenaries, and they're using their Copperhead PMC to take everyone on the base hostage. You've got to get in there and take control, a bit like Die Hard. And the kind of twist on the game is that you're not actually going in. Instead, you're using your VR headset to control this operative of the future, the Espire Model 1. So the idea is that you're standing in your control theatre environment safely in Melbourne in a factory. And the control theatre is kind of like your holodeck. And from the holodeck, you're using cutting edge headsets like the Oculus Rift to control the movement of the Espire 1, who's thousands of kilometers away with 11 milliseconds of latency. And the idea is that every time the Espire robot does any movement that's artificial, such as thumbstick movement, where you're standing still and it's moving, Espire's view shrinks down to the size of a floating iPad. And the hope is that that tricks the brain into thinking, oh, cool, I'm just watching the action that's happening in front of me in 3D space, and in my peripheral vision I can see the control theatre that I'm standing in the real world. And the hope is that it minimizes motion sickness, which is a huge problem for VR, and it was kind of the first feature that was developed for this game that kind of really helped kickstart the development of it. In the game there's a few kind of abilities that you have as a player, and these are all kind of technical challenges for us to get them running in VR, which is kind of what we want to talk about during the talk. You can raise your hand to your head. If you pull the trigger, you have Espire vision, and you can see threats that are within a 20-meter radius. The Espire also has Espire Instinct, which is the ability to kind of slow down time. And with time slowed down, your hands are still moving in real time, so you kind of have 25x force applied to everything you do. You've got little cameras in each of your hands, and they allow you to kind of track enemies through around corners. And you can grip and scale any metallic object in the game, and a few non-metallic objects that we missed during the QA periods. And you can kind of chain those together so you can have slow-mo where you climb and throw yourself. And one of our favorite features is if you say freeze into the VR headset, they'll put their hands up. You can then knock them out, hide the body of the guards. you use a repair tool to repair damage on your body. And effectively with the game, we try to look at our favorite stealth mechanics and think, how could we do them in VR now that we've got, tracked hands and, body presence, I guess. So the pitch from day one was basically Metal Gear meets GoldenEye in an immersive VR world. And we've kind of tried to pick an Australian setting with all Aussie voice actors. There's a few people, from around the world too, US and Glasgow, and made by a mostly Aussie team too. So we hope that kind of gives it a bit of a unique twist, but definitely wearing the inspirations on our sleeve for how we've done the game. And so Espire is available on all the major VR platforms, and that kind of process is what we kind of want to focus in with this talk. So I'm going to try and cover the journey of the game, how it went from a pitch to release, the strategy we ended up settling on for trying to develop for the 3 platforms at once, focusing a bit on Oculus Quest in particular, one of the more popular headsets, and just some silver bullets for making it run better, and then finish with Unreal 425 and some of the awesome features that have been released in the recent months, and then hopefully can get some insight and feedback during question time. So the project started in late 2016. At the time, I was an offline 3D animator, so I was doing renders where it was 90 minutes a frame, and then I got into VR and it was 90 frames a second. And I thought, this is wild. I wasn't 90 frames a second though, because I didn't know about optimization yet. But was really into real time, and so spent a couple of years, especially with Unreal becoming free, just learning the engine, trying some stuff, got really into VR. That was the next step. And then Espire was kind of one of a few projects that was just mucking around with. And over Christmas of 2016-17, I kind of put together this video because I thought I got a few mechanics happening. It could be cool to share it. And the truth is, at the time, most of this stuff in the video was running with Sequencer or Matinee, which was still the thing. And but it was kind of like trying to demonstrate, like, look at some cool stuff you could do in a stealth game in VR, and you could look around corners, and some of our favorite mechanics that maybe would work in a VR setting that, it would be hard to replicate in on a traditional kind of display, I guess. And so, this was built with mostly pretty much 99% marketplace assets, except for the PDA, which was the worst bit of it. And it kind of ended up with making this video reveal, which I kind of put out and then shared in late in early 2017 in Feb. So it kind of had a pitch of here's all the cool stuff you could do. You could say freeze and hold up enemies, and you could distract them with the magazine from your gun, like all the Metal Gear mechanics. And so early Feb, it was a post was made on Reddit, and from that Upload VR article, which was one of the bigger VR only sort of, or VR immersive media focused sites. And from that, it kind of was like a real catalyst. And from just the video and those 2 things, I was introduced to 4 people that kind of became core team members later on. Alf Kuhlman, Alex Float, Shane Colbert, and Alex Shedlock, and also introduced to the people that would become our publishers, Tripwire Interactive, that they make Killing Floor, Maneater, Chivalry 2, and also at that time, I kind of got some advice from mentors to put together a financial forecast. And so we sat around a boardroom, drank heaps of whiskey, and just put together an 18-month game, kind of like budget, profit and loss statement, revenue forecast. And it culminated in being given this opportunity to make a prototype. And so the advice was quit your job, give it a shot. And I got some funding from some initial investors to basically do that and spend 3 months or 4 months trying to put something together. And with the help of Alf and Alex, we ended up with a prototype that was 6 challenges inspired by Metal Gear's VR challenges, and it had a sandbox environment that you could just try out everything in. And the game's kind of a couple of the key mechanics, and you couldn't reload guns, and there was heaps of stuff missing, and it was like more than 100% blueprints. But basically that was, in fact, some of the challenges here end up shipping with the final game in the end anyway, so we just kept moving forward with it. And that led to our vertical slice, which was kind of like the biggest opportunity, or one of the biggest opportunities we got. So we went from a team of like myself full-time with a few others working for free to having the ability to make a full vertical slice of the game. And it was effectively one mission that, depending on if you went agent or Espire agent or VR operative, just like Perfect Dark and GoldenEye, whole areas of the mission would open up, and it would take about 45 to 90 minutes to finish. And it had all of our core mechanics but actually working at this point. So Shane Colbert joined on. He does the speech recognition plugin for Unreal Engine, or the main one, Sphinx UE4. So he kind of implemented that. And our team was now 5 people, and it was only made possible because of Film Vic. And so Tripwire were kind of like, you're a nobody. You didn't even know what an NDA was last time we spoke. And you also don't have a team, but if you can get someone else funding it, we'll put in some funding for a vertical slice. And so we went to Film Vic and said, there's a publisher in the US that are interested in funding us half of the cost if you guys will do the other half. So we put in a application where 50% was Film Vic, 50% was contributed by Tripwire. And it was actually the day that Film Vic gave us the green light. We sent it to Tripwire, and they're like, cool, well, we'll give you the green light for the other side of it. So yeah, if it wasn't for Film Vic, probably couldn't have got that far. But we ended up with, a functioning vertical slice that, again, was still 100% blueprint, but worked. And that finished in May, so we effectively had like 4.5 months to do it. And that kind of gave us this awesome opportunity where Tripwire were like, you know what, we can afford to get one of yous over to the US. And so I flew over to represent the team. We got to pitch it at Oculus HQ, which is basically Facebook. And they gave us 4.5 hours to pitch the game, which was ridiculous and awesome. And they also seem to have a Valve in their lobby as well, which I think is a bit of a copycat thing. But the next day we went to Sony, pitched the game to them as well, and it kind of entered a period that lasted about almost half a year, where it was in kind of contract negotiation. And so we got to fly back again for Oculus Connect 5, specifically to chat with Tripwire and Oculus about whether they would co-fund it. And it was hoping to see if Sony would fund it instead. In mid-September, Tripwire announced that they were going to publish us, but we didn't actually get the deal signed until November. A big part of that too was because at the time, Nick Acharito, our business manager, basically spent the 5 months trying to negotiate a publishing deal that was fair for the team and the publisher, which we think we got. And it took the 5 months, but it was worth it. So it was a deal where we kind of owned the IP, and not going too many specifics, was one was very fair considering the risk. We were a nobody team from Australia that had no track record. Nearly everyone on the project was their first project, and it was a VR title. So it's kind of like all the no's. So we finally got the publishing deal and entered, full production December. But the problem was, we signed up to be an Oculus Quest launch title. That was kind of like what made it go over the line. So they said, we'll let you develop this game. Tripwire and Oculus will co-fund it if you guys can meet Oculus Quest launch in May 2019, which is like, 5 months. And we were like, yep, we can do that. And at that point, we had the game kind of running on the Quest, but not really. And we just thought, who cares? We'll work it out. And it kind of became clear by the end of January that it wasn't going to be a launch title anymore, because it was just impossible. And so we kept developing anyway. And our next goal was kind of like, let's be day 45 in the launch window of this new headset, we'll be in the second kind of big push. So that was kind of like our first official delay. And our team did grow to approximately, around 11 they were kind of pretty much full time. Our next big milestone was March 2019, and at GDC, Intel had a booth, and they approached Tripwire saying, our VR developer has pulled out. Do you guys want to take your title there? So they got us Espire. We weren't there, but they kind of pitched it, and that was a really big moment for us because we pretty much just spent 2 weeks making a demo because we didn't have a proper part of the game that was running. And that demo was 2 weeks back and forth with the head of Tripwire, John Gibson, who pretty much gave us all the feedback, and the demo was received very well. And at the end of GDC, Tripwire came back and said, cool, can you guys just do everything you did in the demo for the whole game now? And we said yes. And that was our second delay. So now we're going to delay to July or so we thought. And then in June, we were able to go to E3, and Tripwire very awesomely kind of had a booth, and they gave us equal presence with their other two titles, Chivalry 2 and Maneater, which we thought was ridiculous in a good way. And effectively, we just had 3 days with press appointments in a small kind of press booth. But that was the biggest moment for us. It keeps getting bigger, I guess, in our head. And we kind of got to meet John Romero. We played the game for 20 minutes. We won a bunch of awards, including the Upload VR Best of E3. And we met a whole bunch of connections that kind of shifted the whole future of the company. So in the end, we basically had 4 delays, 2 of which were public and really terrible. One of them was the day before the game came out, or was meant to. And we, as a full team, we had 11 months. Because it was delayed so much, funding-wise, we were relying on Tripwire, Oculus, Film Victoria for a second time, and the federal government R&D grant, as well as some investment from the original Espire investors when we kind of got to the point where we just can't pay people. And the team size, again, was roughly 11 the whole way through, small budget, and to create effectively a 4 to 6 hour long campaign with 25 challenges on top of that as well. Finally came out in November 2022, so it's about 7 months old now. And I wanted to chat a little bit about what went well and what didn't. So in terms of like the lead up to the release, we were super happy with the coverage it kind of got and the sweep at E3. At release, it did well. It reviewed well with Upload VR, who we kind of held in really high regard, and it was because of them in a way that the game had even started. And they'd mentioned in a podcast, like, why aren't there any stealth games? And that was what we always went on. And they reviewed basically the Quest/Rift version, which was the best showing. At the moment, it's got a 4.3 out of 5. We definitely count that point as it goes up and down on the Quest and Rift store. And it was also picked to be in the National Film Sound Archive for 75 years. We were happy to secure that just as we kind of got to the end of the project. And it meant that we kind of formed this great publishing agreement with Tripwire, which we hope and intend to keep going forever, as long as that is. And it's also has heaps of marketing opportunities, E3, Gamescom. They represented Espire at every single major trade show, every trade show they were at. And we found that Quest was the best platform for us. So I'm going to get more into VR in a sec, but that's kind of like a growing platform that's very accessible, and without breaking NDAs and stuff, it's basically like solely for a long time keeping the company going. So we just thought that's our focus going forward. And we found too that there's sustained sales. So the sales volumes aren't that high considering it's a market, but because every day new people buy Oculus Quests, the game manages to sit in the top 25 top selling page. And so people buy it and it's just a circle. So the sales haven't really gone up, but they haven't gone down. It's just been this flat line for 7 months, and sales obviously, like the summer sale have helped. But importantly too, what went well from the launch was many opportunities opened up. We got to meet Rob Yescombe, who's a freelance writer, particularly big in VR, but had worked on Half-Life Alyx and Farpoint VR, Invisible Hours VR. And he kind of took us under his wing and basically helped produce the game for free and got us a whole bunch of people to help with voice acting. He put us in touch with Drew Roller, making the Golden Era documentary, a doco about the history and the kind of impact of GoldenEye 007. And interestingly, Drew then became our business manager as of about 6 weeks ago. So it's almost, you know, the kind of release of the game has just brought us in all these weird directions we never would have planned. We also were introduced to Dr. Doak, famously from GoldenEye, the doctor you got to get the door decoder from, and programmer at Rare. He cameoed in the game, which was awesome for us. It helped us get great partnerships going also with Oculus in particular, who were the main partner we worked with, but a few partners at like other platforms like Valve and PlayStation, which would set us up for future releases. And of course, Epic Games. Both Chris and Alex were able to help us before and then during that kind of really bad weeks till release and after, which has been kind of put us on the map for them, which was awesome. And we also had some stuff that didn't go well. So the day one launch on all 3 platforms at a time, it bombed for us a lot. And so it meant that the game was a good showing, we thought, on Quest, pretty nice on Rift. We thought it was good on Steam and PSVR, but it just got totally bombed. And as a result, the overall review scores for all platforms tanked for a while. We also had a huge technical challenge getting Quest to work, which I'll talk about later, but that meant that Alex on our team had a great quote of, we spent all the time getting it to work instead of getting it good because, just of the challenges. It was way too ambitious for the small timeline. And we also had a bunch of complex mechanics. You have these hand cameras that you can grab and you can throw them, they stick to walls, and then you can use the UI to zoom them in and make noise. And it just meant that effectively you had to play the game for about an hour to get used to it in VR. And by then some people would have refunded it. And it was just overall rough around the edges. And that's kind of stuck with us since day one. So we have turned it around a bit, and in the last few months, put updates onto the PlayStation and Steam to try and fix it. And then PlayStation has started to sell. Steam is still not doing well, but yeah, we found that, yeah, obviously the post-release support's been important to just keep the sales sustained. So I was going to chat briefly about just VR in general and the perf constraints. Most people in the talk probably are aware, but basically the main thing with VR is it's asking for a lot of frames per second, and it's so that you remain immersed in the VR world. You don't want to see like a slideshow because the headset's basically 3 centimeters from your eye. Also means that your inputs have a really, really low latency. So just moving your hand is butter smooth. Gripping things is smooth as well. And overall, just it's designed to prevent discomfort. And so on top of that, there's a new kind of player in VR where for the last few years there's been PC on the right there, where you have your power of your computer, which is still pretty high. And that allows you to have basically 1,200 draws a frame, 1.8 million triangles if you like, depending on what you're doing, and around 8 gig of RAM to play with. But Quest is the newcomer, and that's a device where it's all in one. So you put the headset on, it's got the outward-facing cameras. The device does all the compute to work out where you are, process inputs, render the frames. It's all in, and as a result, you can maybe get 160 draw calls a frame, 200,000 tries, and you have really about 2 gig of RAM to play with. So it's kind of a huge leap to focus on that side of VR. So the bottlenecks for Quest are different, where it's basically just performance. So you're not just GPU, but CPU. Things like your collision can really kill you, and it really killed us. Just in general, the throughput, like the actual time it needs to send a bunch of triangles and render them, or send a bunch of draw calls, and also resolves, which is something that Chris taught us that we hadn't worked out, where we can get into later. Basically, just if you're trying to render a frame and render other elements of the frame and have them in the same frame buffer, there's not enough time to do that before the next frame's ready in many cases. And the other one's RAM, because it's based on Android. Android loves to kill apps that are getting close to their RAM threshold, and the way our game was programmed, you know, we were killing the RAM ceiling a lot. And so for us, we kind of, one of the major things I wanted to talk about in this talk was just the process we got to try and get the game running on Quest all the way up to PC as like a continuous development in the same branch. And it's probably not the best method, and that's why during question time it'd be great to chat further. But the way we went was looking at our campaign and going, cool, we got 6 missions, and they're basically 30 minutes to an hour long each, depending on how you want to play it. And how are we going to get these running awesome on PC, where we could have 1,200 draws, and on Quest we could have 160, and we just couldn't get a good method where we weren't compromising one of the two. And so the solution we had was basically as shown here. This is the first mission of the game, and it's a weird angle, but you can kind of see the scale. There's a few guards just chilling around, and more interestingly on the right is our kind of level browser. And so we split each mission into kind of 30 to 50 different chunks, and small chunks of the map lived on streaming levels. And so there was a few reasons why we did it, but it meant that, yeah, that was kind of our level composition for all the missions, up to 40 different streaming levels for each one. And those chunks we kind of split up in a 3 different kind of categories. We had Dyne maps that had all our level logic, objectives, guard patrols. ENV maps, where we tried to put just all the static level environment and all the lighting build data. And then we had air maps, which were kind of like our portals, but that would connect environments together. So for example, we've got a small chunk of mission 1. It has 2 airlocks at either end. So there's a lot of airlocks in the game, and we got slammed a bit in reviews because of that. And we basically would split that into an ENV map with all the static meshes and a dynamic map. And so the dynamic map was the key for us to kind of develop the game and not go too crazy. So basically we did it because we wanted to have easier level streaming, so we could easily go through airlocks, and even dynamically too, we could load like 8 chunks at once, and then we could just dynamically turn them on and off. And turning streaming levels on and off would give us basically no hitching, which was the kind of key for us. We'd load them all and then just set visibility of the entire level on and off. And as we turned levels off, all the AI would shut up and stop ticking, and all our blueprints would stop ticking. So it was an easy way for an amateur team to get through it. And it meant that because we're working with Perforce, the level split into 40. The team, mostly Pat and Matt, could work on the same map at the same time and not step on each other's toes, because we could just exclusively check out like little chunks of the map. And this method allows us to do minimal double up. So we had one like set of encounters and one set of level scripting that a Quest and PC version of the game used. And we thought this is our best way to target the game. We just figured that in the end, we're going to have 2 separate sets of levels, because there's just such a big difference between Quest and Rift or PC, where Quest it can't have a good draw distance. The prop count's like 10 times lower. Sometimes we want to do things like turn glass into concrete. And we thought if we have 2 separate copies of the map, we can do that. We can have awesome valid lighting builds, and we don't have to have compromises. We can have awesome Quest, awesome PC. And so an example of how we try to do it was, this is a map from the game we had running on PC. It was awesome, and the guys were just like, this is impossible on Quest. We can't do it. With the players kind of coming in this office along the back and jumping out to the balcony, trying to get onto this top level of this surveillance center. And to run all this on Quest is just going to kill us. And so we would basically have a unique version of the PC environment and then a Quest version of the PC environment, where we did drastic changes. We removed where doors and openings were, and it allowed us to do super wholesale material swaps and then do lighting builds that would look okay. We could swap meshes, and so in this case, on the PC, the player is running out through the balcony, and on the Quest, the player is actually coming through this small corridor, entering the balcony from a totally different angle. But they both shared the same dynamic map, so all the guards had patrols and level scripting and audio sound cues and even waypoints, and all that kind of stuff was just shared with both. Because both were separate maps, they had their own lighting builds, they had their own nav mesh, and the guards didn't care. And the only time it was a real problem was if we tried to draw patrol routes that didn't exist on Quest or the PC version. But it had a bunch of downsides. One of them was inconsistency. So even today, Alex was taking screenshots and we're like, look at this, the PC version versus the Quest. The lighting is totally different. And it's just because after we made the split, any changes we made, we would have to copy them verbatim on both maps, and we just forgot. And it meant too that like cover changed. So we've got a problem here where there's cover for the player there, and on the Quest version there's, or on the PC version there's extra cover here, just because we might change encounters and we might not have the overhead for the cover, or we just might not have time or the memory in our brains. And it meant that when we got into the certification at the end, which really killed us, we had two sets of collision to worry about. So some versions of the game you'd fall through the environment here, but on the PC version it wasn't a problem. And finally, wrangling lighting builds. We still didn't kind of come up with a good solution for automating it. So we would have, you know, lighting build spreadsheets and pretty nasty stuff like that to have, and that's where we would branch the game for the lighting builds. But we got better at it. And so in the end, the game had 25 challenges, and I believe it was like 14 of 25 had shared maps where we were able to get it. One map looked great on Quest, PSVR, and PC. And our most recent update in May had a map like this, Militaris, where it's probably more complex than what we were doing in the mission, but we just, from everything we learned during the process, we're able to kind of optimize it for all the three platforms. That said, I think for any future sequels with big kind of campaigns, we'd probably still take a similar approach of separate environment maps, unless obviously there's better approaches we can do. It gave us all these awesome opportunities to swap out meshes without having memory issues and lighting or other issues. But the way PSVR fit in was a question mark for us the whole time. And in the end, it was a solution like this where we decided we've got our Quest map on the left. And so they all share the dynamic stuff like guards, but Quest sits there. It's got forward shading, and there's no post-process at all using OpenGL 3.1, and very simple shaders. So there was very little PBR shaders used. It also had the MSAA, which on the Quest was definitely doable. And on the right, we had our PC map, which was the deferred renderer, shader model 5. We had post-process, we had volumetric fog and temporal AA, and we kind of thought, cool, what do we do with PlayStation? And in the end, we basically just ran the Quest maps on PlayStation, but with the deferred renderer, with shader model 5, post-process, fog, and AA. And so the result was PlayStation looked kind of crap, but it ran butter smooth, like really quick. And that's where we could do a lot of tricks to improve stuff, which we want to quickly kind of cover. And so the tricks we did that were kind of instrumental for us, and this is the kind of stuff that Chris and Alex at Epic Games taught us, things like scalability. So this is a zoomed in image, so it might be hard to kind of do the justice, but the idea is that roughness might go through a feature level switch, and it's like, cool, if it's shader model 5, go and have a map. But if it's OpenGL, effectively Quest, Matt Henderson basically made our material function goodbye PBR, and that way we would have the same material, and on Quest it would just render without roughness. And it was an easy way to kind of use the same assets on all three platforms. And it meant too that we could have material LODs as well, so we could have a window asset that had high detail and awesome translucency on PC, and the Quest version was effectively unlit. But at least we didn't have to, as an artist, you could just chuck it wherever you want. The other big thing we did was on Quest, we had selective roughness. So the player's hands and all of your key items when they're at Lode 0, where you're holding them, had roughness. The guards had roughness from Lode 2 onwards, and basically nothing else did. And that way we still had a bit of overhead to chuck roughness on some core objects, but that helped us on our performance like tremendously. And so did these kind of like global switches. So being a small team, and with Chris and Alex kind of jumping on in the last 3 weeks or month of development, learning stuff like we shouldn't have metallic. We had easy kind of checkbox to just go make every material in the game have no metallic, full stop. And so they were really handy, and so we could force low quality reflections for the whole game, and without having to go through dozens of materials. The other thing that was awesome, which came in just before we started the project, was per platform LODs. It meant our guards could have 7 LODs, and at Lode 0 it was quite high try for PC, and Lode 1 was for PSVR, and we could override it and go on mobile, Android, start at Lode 2 downwards. And so these really high level of details, they wouldn't even get packaged, and they wouldn't be included in RAM. And it just meant that we could be like, we could do the job, which was awesome. And we set up per platform I&I for everything. And so Shane Colbert, our lead dev, was able to make some sweet build scripts with the automation tool. Chris was saying before the start of this talk that you can learn a lot from production projects. And so we learn a lot from the Robo Recall, and also Tripwire. When we were kind of in dire straits, our publisher got us to work on their VR title, Killing Floor Incursion. And it was basically just an excuse for us to learn a whole bunch of stuff. So we were able to make some robust build scripts where it was double-click Quest, double-click PSVR, double-click Rift, double-click Steam. And then we had a lot of per-platform logic. So the game started 100% Blueprint, and we shipped it about 93% Blueprint. And there's lots of kind of stuff like this where we would just be like, the hand cameras on the player's hands, they're a render target, and they can render, a unique perspective. So based off what headset you're doing, let's render at a certain frame rate. So on the Quest, it renders at 24 frames a second, which was acceptable for us, and it didn't kill our perf. But on PC, it could render it, every second frame or something. So we had that everywhere. And I guess through the whole project, we just kept asking, like, are there any silver bullets for Quest? Is there like a checkbox we can turn on to make the game run? Unfortunately, there isn't. But there was a whole bunch of stuff that was super handy for us. The essentials were for Oculus Quest, again, Android-based, set GPU, CPU and GPU levels, allows you on the fly to kind of set the ceiling. And we set it to the maximum of 4.4, and we just kept it there the entire time. And if we're in the pause menu or something, we'd set it to the floor. Otherwise, we're just going to let you max out the Quest. And Oculus let us ship the game doing that, which is very nice of them. But it meant that the battery dies. So our game will kill the Quest, which is not nice. But we actually saw Robo Recall on the Quest was 4.4 the whole time too. And so we thought, cool, we'll try and get away with it as well. And it just comes down to the Quest is so limited that to try and do some stuff with Ambition where you've got like 12 soldiers running at you, it will, it hurts the system on a chip for it. And there's a feature called fixed foveated rendering. The idea is that the center of your screen is rendered at full res, and then the closer you get to the edge of the screen, it progressively gets rendered until it's like 64 by 64 pixels. And so when you put your headset on, your eyes don't even focus on, or most of the time you don't even notice these pixels. And so for effectively similar results, it gives you, that was a silver bullet. You get 25% speed improvement depending on what your project is. And finally, a silver bullet in a way was turning off mobile HDR, which means you don't get any post-process at all, and you can't have, bloom and tone mapping and stuff like that. But you basically, we kind of learned the hard way that at least with our project, you just can't have it on because there's not enough time to render the scene, look at all of the buffers, and then copy them, to actually read that and use it. That the Quest is expecting the next frame. So we just had full forward shading on the Quest. Another one that killed us, helped not kill us, was software occlusion culling. And we were dying because we just couldn't get occlusion culling to work on Quest, hardware or pre-computer visibility. The results were just not great. But for Fortnite, they added software occlusion culling, which I think they then stopped using it because they just got their other culling methods to work better. But we at least found with our project it worked great. And the idea was that you're manually picking meshes, and on a per mesh basis, you're saying you're going to be an occluder. Everything behind you won't render anymore. So we've got an example of Baker's office from mission 1, and behind everything that should be included is something like 400 drawers. And so the idea is that you'd go through these key meshes in the game and then make them all occluders, and that way they would cull everything behind them as a software pass. And the kind of awesome optimization that our artist Pat found was that if we just chuck a bunch of cubes everywhere and make them the occluders, they're like super low tries, and they're the only things that are occluders, so that's the only thing that gets checked. So basically, a first pass happens where it looks for the occluders, it makes a mask, and then it will then go, cool. It'll test all the other meshes in the scene that are within a distance to the camera and go, cool, would you be occluded behind this mask? Yes or no? I'll occlude you. And because to draw the mask requires triangles, the more tries you have, the crapper the software occlusion culling pass is. You can barely afford it on Quest, and we found by just putting cubes everywhere, that was like one of those close to silver bullet moments for us. And that's where our artist Matt had like awesome ideas where it's like, why don't we just chuck for our meshes, like at LOD 7, it'll never render the player, but we could just chuck in a really crappy, really low try mesh that the software occluder pass will use to then block out everything behind it. And it might only be like 40 tries or something. And then the player is going to see the standard LODs. And that was kind of like another really great win that got us through it. And at the time, at least in 421 Oculus branch, there wasn't any device profiles for Quest. And so it took us months of just mucking around, but we finally came up with like our device profile for Quest with our game that we liked, and that we could kind of go through and then pick for the Quest device profile texture groups. And so we had a great setup where characters, their textures would be saved at 512 by 512 on Quest, but their roughness and their normal map might be 1024 or 2K. And when it rendered, it looked cool because you had detail in the roughness, and the diffuse was blurry, but it kind of worked okay. And it allowed us like globally to just change these values. And until we did, by default, it was sending all the maps out at 4K. And so we're just dying with RAM, and package size was massive until we kind of worked that out. And so this was worked out pretty early. Another one is the PSO cache. I guess with this talk, we just wanted to cover all the stuff that was like awesome things and briefly cover them. Hopefully they're of interest, and if you want to go deep dive on them later, we're going to share these slides. But the PSO cache was one of those things where at a high level, our understanding is that it was designed for Fortnite because every time you encounter a new shader in the game, it's got to be compiled, which could hitch, and you could get these, sometimes they're not even noticeable, it's just a split-second hitch, but in VR, it really hurts, and it happens every time you see a shader for the first time. And so starting with 420 of Unreal, Epic have had a PSO cache that effectively the first time you launch the game, there's a screen that says optimizing content or building shaders, and it just builds every shader in the game that you're going to use at some point, keeps it handy so that every time that shader comes in, there's no hitching. And that's something that, yeah, again, totally saved us. It was epic. We got a bunch of tips on how to get dynamic lights working on Quest. One of the ones that changed us, which was from Chris or Alex, was skeletal meshes. You could set a checkbox, and what it would basically do was say, for the whole mesh, just sample your dynamic light. Otherwise, it's going to use every pixel that mesh takes up on screen. And that was a huge boost. In the end, though, we just went for no dynamic lights on Quest in a stealth game, which kind of sucked, but we just couldn't get them done in time. So we globally turned off dynamic lights on Quest. We found too that material divergence would kill us. So another thing that we learned late in the project idea was that if you've got materials that have an if every single frame, it's going to run through every single possible, out of it or variation. And so we were taught, and also our tech artist Matt kind of spent some time trying to work out how can we do this without an if. And sometimes it was just, let's just make it again. But sometimes it was hard, but that was a huge improvement for us. And finally, a big one we found was that custom nodes. If you had any HLSL logic or code in a custom node, when it came to Unreal trying to compile your shaders, it couldn't handle the custom nodes. And it's from the instruction manual, because I'm not the programmer, it does constant folding where it optimizes your projects for all platforms. And if you have all the stuff hidden in a custom node, it can't do that. So the solution we had was basically, sometimes it looked messier, but we would just put it into, because again, we're beginners, we just put it in the material, what we were trying to do anyway, and it ran a lot better, which was cool. Or at least, as I understand, it was optimized better. This one's a fugly picture, but it was kind of one of the biggest things for us that helped. And we found late in the project that our heads-up display was killing us, because effectively, like most games, our HUD was rendered as a widget. And so on Quest, it would render the scene, which might be a corridor with guards, and then it would render in a separate pass the HUD. And it would then go, cool, I've got both, but I need to copy one of them in order to actually render that, which would take ages. And by the time it's done that, we're not hitting frame rate. And so the biggest lesson we were taught was to not do that. And so what was previously one massive HUD that had all our heads-up display turned into 7 or 8 tiny widgets that were like 120 by 80 or whatever. And some of them weren't even widgets in the end. We just made static meshes that had textures, and every possible texture, and we just switched the texture based off if it's saying hull critical or objective complete. And that way, there's not even a resolve anymore. And then also we're showing stereo layers where it actually won't even render these widgets in the Unreal pass. It'll render them with the Oculus runtime and look crisp. It rendered well. And so that saved us hugely. And it meant that we basically had to do some more work as well. So per platform, we could change the scale of the widgets, which we didn't know we could do. So on PC, it was a high-res widget, but on Quest, we'd go 4 times lower. And it looked a little soft, but we'd just keep going as low as we can go where it looked good. And then the biggest one was just don't draw every frame. And so we would just set everything to only update when stuff happened. Otherwise, every tick, we just had the widget drawing itself over and over and over again. And the day we did that, the frame rate went from like 60 to 72, and we all celebrated. It was awesome. And I guess on those updates, that was another one that was just, as a beginner, it really caught us out. A lot of our default blueprints would just tick every frame, but at 90 frames a second, it was killers. So our AI behavior trees, we would just tick them at 5 times a second, and we'd have huge improvements, and it wouldn't really affect logic at all. We also had to make a system called clusters where, because we couldn't get occlusion culling to work well, we would basically manually cull whole chunks of the game by just making these kind of little empty actors called cluster parents. We then just run a simple set visibility, propagate to children, and then as an artist, you just parent whole chunks of the map to that cluster, and then we had volumes that, based on the direction you ran through, they would show or hide them, and that was instant. They still were there for collision purposes, but they just didn't get included in the draw calls, which helped us a lot. Audio was also another big thing for us. In the end, we set everything almost to streaming for RAM. We could use quality level switches so that Android didn't do processing. And we mucked around the settings until we got to the point where even streamed audio sounded real time. So sometimes we had gunshots that were streamed, but they sounded good enough. Like they might have been 2 or 3 frames late, but it was awesome. And we also went through and ages trying to lower our draw claw count. And the best solution we had in the end was to merge by material. So something that might be 30 draws, we could reduce it down to 2, where it was something like 20 or 60 tries, but it didn't merge materials. That was the biggest thing we learned. Instead of atlasing all our textures and creating 4K maps, even though that we could use them a lot, we already had a fairly low subset of textures that we could just keep at high res, tile them. Even if they're 512 by 512, they would just look a lot better. We found too that the HLED system. We couldn't get it looking like bulletproof, but what we ended up doing was just turning the whole chunk, because we were in a hurry. So whole chunks of the game just turned into HLODs. We just turned them on all the time, and then it would use the original meshes for collision and render the HLEDs, but we would then not merge the mesh, not merge the material, so the materials look fine, and the results were pretty awesome, considering. And finally, we tried to use instant static mesh and hierarchical instant static mesh, and that was something that, again, we got running, and we could avoid having to merge meshes unless we really needed to. And then the last kind of thing I wanted to touch in the talk was just the stuff that is now in Unreal that we actually haven't really started using yet, that we want to. So we built our game on Unreal 421 Oculus branch, and since then, some of the cool things that we've seen added are things like the Vulkan renderer, which now supports a lot of the VR optimisations, which means it will hopefully improve performance a lot. There's a new mesh drawing pipeline, which means hopefully less merging of certain assets. We believe there's plenty of fixes that have been in VR over the last few releases that would help all VR devs. We've seen shared animation states come out, which we can see would have improved our game a lot too, just with the way the guards were done. And we believe there's been improvements to culling as well, which might make things like software occlusion not really a big deal anymore. But that's basically everything that we wish we knew before we started. And I guess, yeah, on behalf of the team, we appreciate the opportunity to talk tonight. So they've all put in all their knowledge into this talk, and we're hopeful. We haven't really been to any of the meetups before. We've been living under a rock for a few years, but hopefully going forward, we can make some more contacts in the industry. And we haven't quite got any job opportunities at the moment, but hopefully there's some few projects that could happen. And so it'd be great to keep in touch. You can get in contact with us either the contact at Espire or the, we've got a jobs email as well. Yeah, that's basically it.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Michael. That was a great talk.
Yeah, that was wonderful, dude. That really covered a super broad range of content in there. And there was some nice little optimizations you made along the way. That was great.
Yeah, that was hit the nail on the head. That's really cool. Well, I guess we'll take it out to questions. So we'll just use the little the questions box on the bottom of the Zoom stream. There will be like a Q&A little button, and then we can enter like questions in there if anyone has any.
Feel free to jump in that or the chat since it's live at this point. But yeah, that was really good. I thought that was you had a lot to battle for your very first release, like simultaneously going multi-platform, having to push out for one of the lowest end platforms that you could for VR while simultaneously trying to please the PC crowd is no easy task.
I guess I have a question. Now, after finishing the project, what were some things that you would have like essentially changed during the production?
I guess everything in that presentation.
Yeah, no, but
you just covered that for 45 minutes.
Yeah, but like, sort of maybe like in your experience, for example, doing like cross platform on launch, for example, is something that you may have considered, or
that's the primary one. Like something we didn't really cover in the talk that much was that we did have an external dev help us as well with the PSVR, because it got to the point where we just couldn't do all three platforms, and so we were kind of partnering with some other guys as well. And because it was such a high risk project, completely understandably, our publisher was like, if we don't launch on all the platforms, it's not going to recoup the investment, and also the marketing spend is going to be very high to try and stagger the release. And so yes, and yeah, that's number one, what we would not do again. And also the publisher, they totally owned it too, and like, you know what, we won't do that again either. But I think it comes down to, I think because VR is a very tough one to kind of pick, where it's like, if you target PlayStation, is it still going to be a thing in a year time? Or is PS5 even going to support really truly a PlayStation VR 2? Like it's not, it's hard to know. So yeah, in many ways, just single platform focus could be great, and because of that, we would go Quest at least.
No, that's sort of the answer I was looking for. Yeah, cool.
We've had 2 questions come in. One, I'm not sure if you're able to answer or comfortable answering, so please be aware. The question is, did it make enough money for you to continue? And I think better phrased might perhaps be, are you confident in future VR projects or projects in a similar vein?
Yeah,
Might be the safer way to answer that one.
Yeah, I guess what we can talk to is like, we've got 9 guys full-time now, and it's made enough money where we effectively have basically like a 8 to 10 month runway, and because it sells the same amount of units every day, that runway just kind of shifts along with us, and that's basically what we've been doing. And so it did make enough money for us to keep going, which is great. It recouped the because it was a low budget title, it recouped its investment like very quickly. And VR is definitely a small market, and so yeah, I guess our confidence is, and I think Chris was sort of talking about it before the proper talk, where yeah, if you have a team that's at the right size and you do a project of the right size and length with the right budget, then the risk is a lot lower. So we have ambition to kind of work on a bunch of different Espire stuff, and for us it's just trying to find the right answer of what to do next. In the meantime, we're working hard on just supporting this game and doing some other contract jobs as well.
Wonderful. And the other question that has come in was, you mentioned you broke your UI/widgets from one master to many smaller ones for more performance. Did moving to multiple widgets require anything interesting?
Yeah, I think that's probably the other thing that we learned hardcore with VR was we got so close in development, we had to rewrite everything. And so widgets, definitely trying to change it from 1 widget to 7, that broke a lot of stuff. And so Dart, our programmer, just spent 2 straight weeks on bug fixing. One of the other things was collision. We found in the certification that when you shoot guards and knock them out, just in certain cases it would hitch for like 15 milliseconds, which meant you skipped a few frames and it became a blocker. And so we had to completely change the way we did our hitboxes and stuff, which made endless bugs. And so I think that was a thing. If you're a PC title going to Quest, you just have to rewrite a lot of stuff from scratch again, because it counts. But Oculus, actually, to their credit, at least at that time and probably still now, they gave us free QA for every Quest title. So they're really big about making sure that their stores got a certain, level of quality. And so they gave us basically just for the whole certification, which for us was like 14 weeks long, keywords QA, they were awesome. And
we've had 4 questions drop in the space of about 3 seconds. So next up was there ever ideas or discussions to Americanize the game's references? Because you did keep everything Australian, which is pretty unique.
Actually, when I went to the USA, I spoke to the John Gibson of Tripwire Interactive and said, we're ready to set it in the USA. We're totally down. We'll sell our souls, whatever. Like,
what are you doing?
But he was like, no, I love Australia. Actually, if you ever see anyone that's got like the Falcon XB from Mad Max, you got to get me onto them. Like, I totally love Australian culture. And so he was like, ham it up. And
that's great.
Awesome for us. But it definitely didn't, there was definitely friction with some players going, what's with all these New Zealand accents in the game? And so we thought for a sequel, we're going to make sure we have a better fine line, like, of accents. So hopefully we can find a middle ground.
Yeah, I've had that before with releasing something that had an Australian accent in it. A lot of people are like, oh, this sounds so fake. And I'm like, that's an Australian person.
Yeah.
That's how we sound when it's not an American pretending to be an Australian.
You're not putting on enough.
Yeah, there's a few other questions, if you don't mind, if we just run through them. Was there anything that you had to scrap because it just wasn't working?
That was something that we learnt now, and it's basically we didn't scrap anything really. So, like I said, prototype challenges. We're in the final ship game. And so I think some of the best feedback we got is less is more. And so if we had actually kind of cut our feature base, we had like sneak up behind enemies and say freeze. It worked awesome, but it just didn't work awesome on like all the different headsets that had different microphones and stuff. So we just didn't have the capacity to do them justice. We should have cut half the stuff and it would have done better.
Good. That's a great response. Next up was, how do you see the future of VR games? Is the growth across the board similar to what you would have expected?
I think it's slower than what I thought it would be. But one thing that I'm harping on about a lot is the growth of XR viewers. So imagine the Oculus Quest headset. And does my video still come through as well, or is it just a sharing screen?
We have the question screen up.
Oh, cool. But yeah, effectively, it's like you got your Oculus Quest headset standalone. There's an emergence of XR viewers, which are basically a headset that's got lenses, an awesome screen, sound, and cameras, but it doesn't have all the compute. And the idea is that your phone in your pocket with a USB-C cable will tether to that headset. And the next generation, it'll wirelessly tether. And then the next generation after that, it will wirelessly tether to a PC. And I kind of see that as the next big thing for VR, where suddenly it's like anyone that's got effectively Google Pixel 3 or up would be able to buy these $200 versions of Quest that would give you the exact same experience. And I feel like that would make VR bigger, because Oculus Quest has proven that it's kind of like the barrier to entry there is only this cost and supply now. Everyone that buys them, or a lot of people that buy them, love them. And so, yeah, I think that VR will see good growth, or could see good growth if things go well. That's why we're doing it.
We've just got 2 questions left. One was, having tackled a very ambitious VR game as your first commercial offering, would you recommend other VR devs, aspiring devs, to shoot for the stars or take a more cautious approach? Part 2 of this question from Kevin Armstrong is, if you were to go back into it again, would you scale back some of the features of Espire, or are you happy with how features and mechanics, mechanic heavy it became? I guess you partially answered that second part, but yeah, what is your advice to new devs kind of going into it?
I think it would be better to do a smaller title, because you can get shipping quicker, and that way you can get feedback quicker. And I think the big feedback too is that, like, very luckily we kind of got some early funding, and I think, again, all because it was VR, and it was right at the nice VR point where it was a buzzword, and it meant that we can take a few risks, and the idea was almost validated enough to get a bit of funding. And so I thought, if I was going back to do it all again, then yeah, I think I would still shoot for the stars, but try and have someone with me that was the baby killer. So that's kind of been Nick's job, and now Drew. And effectively, no one on the team would kill any of our babies. We would just put them in and try and work on them. And no one on the team had the kind of the guts and the oversight to go, this has got to cut. Like, we shipped the game with a save feature. You could pause, save the game at any time, and then resume. And in the end, the missions were 30 minutes long, and most players could play on the Quest and just turn the headset off and on again. That stays the memory anyway. We had so many save game bugs, and we just thought, man, if we just killed that feature, literally nothing would have happened. No one would have cared. We could have spent like 3 months for one person on cooler stuff. So rambling, but yeah, I think smaller projects would be a better idea, and reach for the stars, but then cut to the moon sooner.
Cool. And the final question for tonight was, just, will you continue to focus on the Quest specifically, or will you work on higher end hardware?
That's something that's like kind of core at what we're talking about at the moment. And so we're effectively going to focus on all hardware. As a company, we're trying as a small team to at least try and establish a niche in immersive media. So we're doing a current project for a tech school where we're building an escape room, and that's using PC with the Vive Pro. But I think our focus for the consumer market would be to go for the Quest. And I think in 3 years, like in the short term, I can see the standalone market being a pretty big one, where it is the compute of your headset that's working. And if you can I feel like a small team could do some awesome work in standalone. A small team trying to compete in the high end with PlayStation 5 and PC, it would be much harder for us, in my opinion, to do something awesome. And yeah, I think the in the midterm, I can see VR headsets going realistically to where it's like 5G, no joke. You know, it's rendering in the cloud, and you're getting live updates. The latency is that low, and you might be getting 5G coronavirus. But yeah, I think that's where it's going to be just high end. But for now, I think we're going to focus on the Quest. That's what kept our company afloat for sure.
Well, look, this has been a wonderful presentation. Thanks a lot, Michael, for coming along for this one. And thanks, Yasin, as always, for organizing the Unreal Engine Melbourne Meetup. And thanks to all of you for joining in and participating. Hopefully we see you all again next month. Yasin, I think we're still in the process of finalizing next month.
We are still in the process for finalizing next month's Unreal Meetup, but do keep those spaces open. So
yeah, great. And if anyone has anything that they think would be of value to the rest of the community, please, by all means, we'd love it if you could reach out and let us know, because Yasin here is always hunting down more speakers, and it's great because even every now and then we'll drag someone in who hasn't really been generally part of the Unreal Engine Melbourne Meetup stuff, such as Michael. And there's a lot of value in that too. So if you know anyone that might be keen, please let us know. But in the meantime, thanks everyone for your time, and hope to see you all again next month. Have a good night.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you all. Much appreciated.